The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
All right, it's beer festival time yet again here in Florida and on the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author, and we're going to be talking about a couple awesome beer festivals that are coming to the state here in a very, very short time. I love these beer festivals because unlike some beer festivals, which are clearly just cash grabs and people want to go in and get as drunk as possible, as quickly as possible, festivals like these love to celebrate craft beer. They love to educate, enlighten, and really showcase what the industry is doing in terms of artistry and ability, much more than just a booze cruise. So thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you are listening to us on an awesome podcasting app. If you are, make sure that you subscribe to our podcast. And if you can, make sure to leave a nice big review for us. That will help us when it comes to searches and allow more people to find the Florida Beer Podcast. Obviously, we also want you to follow us on social media. We're at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter, FL Beer Blog on Facebook, and obviously we are online at FloridaBeerPodcast.com and of course, FloridaBeerBlog.com as well. We are also a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find all the latest information for the shows on the network, what is out and what is coming at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com or on our private, but we'll let you in, of course, Facebook group that is FPN Insiders. Hopefully we will see you there. And hopefully we'll see you in Fort Pierce on November 19th for the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail Festival. If you've never heard of the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail, it is an organization that was set up as a partnership between the breweries and the winery that is on the Treasure Coast and the three local governments in that area, being Indian River County, St. Lucie County, and of course, Martin County. It's great to see the tourism boards for each of those counties partnering with the local businesses to really try to ramp up tourism and highlight such a fantastic business model that really does invite people to come and stay, and obviously, most importantly, spend and come back again and again and again. So the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail was created by a few breweries and the Summer Crush Winery in Fort Pierce, which is where the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail Festival will be held on November 19th. To get a full rundown of everything that happens, not just at the winery, but for the festival, we spoke to Allen Cooley. He is at Summer Crush, and he gave us the full rundown of the history of the winery, what it's like to grow grapes in South Central Florida, I guess, because it's just a little bit below Central Florida, but not necessarily South Florida. Some of the products that they are making at Summer Crush, and obviously the grounds that will be home to the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail Festival. Definitely think you should go. I am excited to go myself. We will be there broadcasting live. So hopefully you'll be able to watch us online, but it'd be better if you were just to see us with your own eyes because you were there at the festival yourself. But to get a good idea for what it's going to be like, what Summer Crush Winery is all about, here we go, our conversation with Allen Cooley. Enjoy. I will start by asking, I guess, the stereotypical question, because when you think of wineries, Florida is not exactly the state that you think of first. It's traditionally places with a little bit more temperate climates. You know, you kind of take a look at the west coast of the United States, starting in Northern California, sort of the Napa Valley, and heading up towards Oregon, and Washington. Is Florida a good state for producing wine, and how so?
First, thank you. I mean, we're happy to be your first winery. That's very cool for us. So we're excited about that. First one to be on the show. It would depend on who you ask if Florida is a good state for making wine. The types of grapes that we can grow are very different from all of the vinifera's and different styles of wines that are being produced elsewhere in our country. And that's due to our climate. We're very limited with what our environment will allow us to grow. And so for centuries, people have been trying to grow different styles of grapes, and the environment, it's a wilderness, and it just will accept what it will accept, and grapes will only grow where they want to grow. And so we are limited in the styles of fruits that we have, grapes and other fruits, but that also opens up a whole avenue to create a whole nother spectrum of wine for anybody that would enjoy it. The thing about wine that I like to liken it to would be that there's just the way that you could choose what music you want to listen to and what clothes you would like to wear. There's going to be a style of wine for everybody. There's a lot of people that will come in and say they don't like wine, they're not wine drinkers, and then they try some of ours and they're like, wow, we really like this. And it's just that there's so many different options now that are available and different spectrums of flavors that are, I would say that Florida wine is in a different spectrum of the major wine large category.
Gotcha. And speaking, obviously, I kind of want to go into the fruit wines as well, but when you talk about the wine, you obviously assume grapes. And it seems like most of the wines that you are producing are with muscadine grapes. Can you give us a quick rundown of that specific grape compared to the other grapes that are in more traditional wines and what drinkers can expect?
Sure. So the muscadine grape is a family of grape. It has a million different nicknames, muscadine, different pronunciations of it as well, but muscadine, muscadine, scuppernong, fox grape, sand grape, bullet. It is a grape that is native to the deep south, I would say. So the southeast United States, and it is indigenous to the area. So it was written about by the early explorers when they first started coming through these areas in North Carolina and down into Florida. And the first wine ever made in the history of our, quote unquote, discovery of this country was actually in Florida, and it was with muscadine grapes. So there's a very rich history. The first vineyard, as far as I'm aware too, unless the history has changed on it, the first vineyard was also planted here in Florida. So the first wine was up around Fort Caroline, which is now in that Jacksonville area. Mm-hmm. And the first vineyard was over on the West Coast. And so there's a rich history of people cultivating these grapes, but because they were indigenous and they could grow. Outside of Florida, or inside of Florida, all of the European style grapes, when they were planted, they would not thrive. They would die off. And so the muscadine itself, being native to the area, it's not related genetically in any way to the other styles of European grapes. There's some other indigenous varietals of grapes that grow farther north in our country as well that are not related to European grapes, but the muscadine is the one that is for Florida and basically can go all the way up through Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, down south, farther south of that, down through Florida. It can grow as far west as Texas. And I've heard that they're experimenting with it out in California now to make it more of a table grape, so an eating grape, as opposed to making wine with it.
Interesting. And obviously, so we've got the grape. Why was Fort Pierce and the Treasure Coast and at large, why was that a natural location for creating a vineyard and winery?
Fort Pierce became the location for us because that's where we lived. It wasn't the winery we developed out of necessity, and it wasn't something that we were very passionate about as far as wine goes as a family until we started to develop this project. It was an idea to utilize our acreage that we had. Total property is 37 acres, and we had utilized the rest of it for a landscaping company. But the remaining acreage economy dropped in the mid 2000s. Or early 2000s. We needed to find another avenue of business to get into. And a couple friends of the family suggested a winery. And our first reaction was no. We live in Fort Pierce. And one of the gentlemen said, well, I've got grapes that grow in my backyard. Well, why not? So then our owner, Gary Roberts, my stepfather, did a great deal of research and business planning to see if it would be viable. And we decided to start moving forward with it in 2008. The construction started in 2010. And then we opened July 14th of 2012. It's just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. The region for us, as far as growing grapes, is actually not as ideal as it would be if we were located farther north. Even though muscadines are indigenous to Florida, they still require, for better growing methods for the fruit, they still require more of a climate change than Fort Pierce has. The universities have studied that essentially the bottom of Lake Okeechobee is kind of the southernmost point where these vines will produce fruit. The vines actually grow all the way south through the Keys, but they don't produce fruit in the way that they would produce fruit once they get to the bottom of Lake Okeechobee and then farther north. So if we had the same amount of vineyard space that we had planted, 2-3 hours north of us, then we would be producing a great deal more fruit from the same acreage that we have planted that we do. So we are limited in the amount of production due to the amount of fruit yield that we receive every year. So the Fort Pierce location was just because that's where our family was from.
Interesting. And so I guess how, from the time that you decided to go ahead and plant a vineyard with the ultimate goal of producing wines, how much development, research, trial and error did it take before you received a crop that had enough yield to where you could really do a good run of table wines?
In the beginning, we planted 1 acre of vines to see if they would be viable on the property. And we did receive good growth from those. And so essentially the next year we decided, okay, let's go ahead and plant the rest. And it was always an experiment. And we're still doing R&D and we're still doing development. I think everybody that works in winery is always learning. And so we learn with the vines every year, and we learn with our winemaking every year how to try to improve and make the best quality liquid that we want people to enjoy. And so the initial phase of R&D, apart from the vineyard itself, Gary experimented for probably a good year, maybe 2 years, with an entire bedroom in the house where he would leave the regular work job of the landscaping and go home and make wine and experiment with the flavors and what we hope to scale to the cellar once we had everything constructed. So the mindset that he had for this was he will continue to move the project forward until we hit an obstacle that's too large to surmount. And we never hit that obstacle. And so the timeline that he constructed, once he decided we were moving forward with it, we were all in, and he had certain dates that he wanted certain things completed so that we could start moving forward. And once we planted the vines in 2010, they were 2 years old. We didn't receive a significant crop from them for probably another 3 years. But one of the things that you're able to do in the wine world and in alcohol world is buy in what you need to be able to make your flavors and your wines with. So we were able to supplement what we're unable to produce from our vineyard ourselves by bringing in juice from other places to make our wines here. So we
Awesome.
can cellar them, finish them, bottle them, all of that here.
Okay. And obviously you also mentioned other fruits. Does that mean that you are able to source those fruits so that way you can make the wines on the property? Or do you also have other products growing in your fields?
We're currently only growing 10 acres of muscadine, and that's of 3 different varieties, and mainly 2 that we use. For the Noble is the red and the Carlos is the white. And those, at the time when we planted, and probably still, are the most commonly used for winemaking. People have been researching these for many years. As far as the family of muscadine goes, there's over 300 different varieties that they've identified and cultivated. And so these 2 Carlos and Noble were the two main ones that we planted in the vineyard. And then we planted an acre of another one that the owner really liked, Doreen. And from what we've seen, we don't have enough of the chilling hours, the colder weather, to give them what they need to be able to grow successfully. But the Carlos and the Noble have done well for us. So the other fruits that we utilize to make wine with, we source in what we need. We have a pure mango wine, and we have a pineapple muscadine blend that we make. And a couple of times we experimented with some blueberry.
Interesting. So once you finally opened your doors and started selling the wines, what was the reaction from the Fort Pierce residency and people that were living there? Were they a little shocked and surprised to see a winery show up in their backyard?
They very much so. And we still get that reaction 10 years later. I never knew there was a winery here. And now we can say, well, we've been here for 10 years. Where have you been? But it's one of those things that people don't normally associate our state with wineries, as you were discussing earlier. So it would depend on the person's knowledge of the areas, and that I think every state now has a winery. But when we first opened, the reactions when people came in were they were expecting what you would typically see on a normal restaurant menu, your standard Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay. And those are all European vinifers that we're unable to grow. And so when people tasted our wines in the beginning, there was always some discord. And then after we'd been open for a couple of years, and you're probably more familiar with this than I don't know when exactly they would date the craft boom in our state, but we went from a handful of breweries to, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was over 300 in a very short period of time.
There's a lot.
Yeah. So there, in that craft boom, we saw a change in people coming into the vineyard because they expected to taste the flavors of the region. And that was with people's knowledge catching up to what we had in place already. So we benefited from that greatly because people were no longer coming in looking for the flavors that they wanted. They were coming in to experience what we could produce.
Awesome.
And that came about with the tourism industry and people wanting to visit breweries and wineries when they travel, because it's a great thing you can do with families, or just to when you're traveling by yourself, to have a nice afternoon, weekend to yourself.
And you sort of mentioned that traveling, in that you kind of built up Summer Crush not just to be a producer and grower, but it really has become sort of a destination. It's definitely a place for people to come to and actually go out of their way to try to reach. Before you go into discussing all the awesome things that you have on a regular basis at the winery, why was it important to be that destination when you could have just been a producer and have people pick up the wines in stores?
I think once we were open for a period of time and we saw what we were going to be able to produce and how the wines were received, most wineries, when you travel, they all have an event space where they'll bring in live music and you can enjoy your bottle of wine, listening to some live music, and most often purchase food as well. And that was always in the plan for the development, because we developed as a boutique winery where we have our festival space sits inside our 10-acre vineyard, and then the wine cellar and the tasting room and gift shop. So we wanted to include all aspects, essentially multiple businesses under one umbrella. And the development of the events, we started with one a month, and then one every 2 weeks, and then one a week. And now it has developed into something that we do every Saturday and Sunday. And once we're in season, we actually do live music 5 days a week. And our event space is set up more as a concert venue than it is live music in the background. So people are coming to our events to see a show. And we found that people enjoy coming out to spend the afternoons with us. We experimented with a lot of different time frames. And what we found our magic spot was live music from 1 to 4. And the band plays for that entire time with just 2 or 3 breaks depending on the act, and it's more of a concert show than it is just live music in the background. So as that, we developed the events as we saw the need to give people a reason to come back to our vineyard. Once you visited once, you may come back again because you want to bring a friend, but we wanted to create the option for people to have something that they wanted to come back for on multiple occasions. So we have many regulars that attend many events each weekend. And so as that developed, it just became our focus. The wine allows us to do everything that we do. And it's a huge aspect of what we do. But our business model was more designed for selling here on property than it was for distribution. Being a small family winery with only a handful of full-time employees, family owned and operated still, Gary and his wife, Susan, and myself. And then we have one other full-time employee. We work everything. And so in that smaller environment, it fed more to developing events than it did scaling into large distribution.
Gotcha. And it looks like one of the events that you have coming up is tied in to your membership in the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail. And kind of like we had said before we got started, the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail is kind of named that way specifically because Summer Crush Winery was one of the founding members of the organization, if I'm correct.
That's correct. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so how did that get started? How has it grown since its inception?
The Wine and Ale Trail was the child of an idea that when you travel there to other states that have many vineyards, they already have wine trails in place. And you're able to jump on a bus or use a car, and you have a map you can follow, and you visit multiple wineries within a day. And where we are on the Treasure Coast, and with the number of breweries that we're starting to develop and that we're currently in operation, Gary knew that in order for us to be a part of the wine and ale, or of a trail, that we needed to incorporate the breweries, because we were the only winery within, give or take, an hour of us. And so it's not hopping down the road a quarter mile to visit the next winery, which is the way it is in some of the states in our country, which is amazing. But for us, with everything being so spread out, the idea for the trail was to incorporate everybody that was in that region into some sort of trail. And so he came up with working with Pete Paradoli Brewing, the Florida Wine and Ale Trail, and worked with everybody they needed to work with. And I'm not as well versed on all the other names that helped in the venture to create the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail. And since that development, we've seen many more breweries join, be a part of it. And we all belong to a trail map, where if you complete the trail map, you get to have a prize at the end of it. And it drives people's awareness of all the great breweries and us in the area. And people are able to, it gives exposure and it gives business to all of those places. So a lot of brewers, as you are very well, get together and they do beer festivals. And so the Wine and Ale Trail Festival is named that Wine and Ale because we are the only winery in it, but we host a festival each year. And we see a great turnout for people to come and purchase their admission ticket to the event. And then they have unlimited tastings from all of the vendors that are present. And it's great exposure and a great afternoon because we couple it with live music, and we have food vendors that are here and art vendors. So you've got an art show you can walk through, and it's a great way to spend an afternoon.
And I was going to say, one of the interesting things about it is that it is kid friendly, which you don't see
Absolutely.
a whole lot of. How, I guess, what is there for the kids, and how was that decision reached? Because it's very rare that you see a kid-friendly festival like this.
As a winery, we are family friendly, and so when the Trail Festival, Wine and Ale Trail Festival came about, a lot of our customers, if they weren't able to bring their children, probably would have been confused. So we serve alcohol, and we're definitely more adult oriented as far as the event space, but we wanted to cater to families that wanted to come out and enjoy an afternoon as well. And so when we were discussing for the festival if we should allow children, we just came to the decision to use wristbands and carding for each of the people that were of age to drink, and still allow the kids to be able to enjoy the day with their parents being on the property. And so our space that we are utilizing is larger than an acre that we're using for the event. And so we have the capacity to have them be able to be out on the grounds as well, as opposed to being in a tighter area with no space. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we catered to the families as well.
That's awesome. And so for people that actually do want to go, how much is it going to be, and what will they expect to receive with that admission?
Okay, so for the Wine and Ale Trail Festival, the ticket, if you purchase your admission ahead of time, is $30, and that includes unlimited tastings from all the vendor tents. And the day of admission will be $35. We do have an admission-only ticket as well, and that is if you would like to attend the event, listen to the music, but you're not interested in tasting from the vendors, and that is a $10 admission ticket. And then we have children 12 and under that are allowed in free for that. So if you are interested in coming to and purchasing the admission only, we still will have our beer and wine bar open, where you can purchase our regular beverage selection that we offer for all of our events.
What kind of stuff is there for the kids? Will you have activities and such?
We won't have kid-specific activities, but we do have games on the grounds that the kids like to enjoy, larger Connect Four and checkers and cornhole boards. But it's more so being able to spend the day with their parents here on the property. It won't be designed like a festival where there's kid-specific activities. It's definitely geared more towards adults, but we didn't want to limit the parents that wanted to bring their children.
Gotcha. That sounds pretty cool. And you'll still be sampling some of the wines that you have for people that are going to the event?
We will have our tasting room open, and that is separate from where our event space is. But whenever we have our events, through all of our hours of operation, our tasting room and gift shop are open, but that's run separately from the event space. So the tasting room will be open for people who would like to go and see us and perhaps weren't aware that the festival was happening that day. That's offset from where the actual festival is happening. I imagine most people, if they show up and see a festival, are going to be all in. I know I would be. And so, but we do have that option available for people that are still just coming to sample our wines specifically and peruse our gift shop. We will be pouring our wines as part of the festival as well. We'll have the samplings of ours out for the unlimited tasters that are attending the festival, but separately, the tasting room will also be open. And one thing, I believe that the admission only ticket will be $15 at the gate.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I do appreciate your time, and I cannot wait to come visit you soon.
Happy to be on. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you.
So there's a good rundown for a family-friendly event. I am definitely very excited about that and cannot wait for November 19th. On our next episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, we have another beer festival that we're going to be highlighting. This one is a particular friend of ours. Cannot wait to go back because every year it just keeps growing and growing. But obviously, make sure that you get your tickets for the Treasure Coast Wine and Ale Trail Festival as soon as you can, and make sure to come out and enjoy this amazing event. Thank you so much to Allen and the rest of the team at Summer Crush Winery, and especially the tourism boards for Indian River, Martin, and St. Lucie counties for this. We will be there broadcasting live. You will get another episode letting you all know how the event was. Cannot wait for that. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brazovich. Our field producer is Steve Pekala. Executive producer for the Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Legagneur. This is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening to us. Make sure to find us on social media, and we will see you next week. Thank you, and drink Florida Craft.